In the early 20th century, Europe was a continent on edge. On the surface, life seemed normal: bustling cities, factories churning, railways transporting goods and people, and families living their daily lives. But beneath this veneer of peace, tensions were simmering, and the world's greatest powers were preparing for conflict. Industrial might, military ambition, and nationalism combined to create an environment in which war was not just possible, but, as history would show, inevitable. The assassination of a single man, Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria-Hungary, in the city of Sarajevo, would become the spark that ignited a continent-wide inferno. Yet, this event alone cannot explain the outbreak of the Great War. To truly understand why Europe plunged into one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, we must examine the complex political, social, and economic forces at play in the years leading up to 1914. This is the story of how World War I began. Europe at the start of the 20th century was a patchwork of empires, kingdoms, and nations, each with its own ambitions, grievances, and fears. Germany, unified in 1871 under Otto von Bismarck, had rapidly become a continental power. Its economy was growing at a remarkable pace, its industrial capacity rivaled Britain's, and its military was expanding steadily. Leaders in Berlin dreamed of asserting Germany's dominance, gaining colonies, and projecting influence across Europe and beyond. France, still smarting from defeat in the Franco-Prussian War, nursed wounds and sought to regain territories lost to Germany, particularly Alsace-Lorraine. The French military invested heavily in fortifications, technology, and alliances, especially with Russia. Britain, meanwhile, ruled the largest empire the world had ever seen, yet its leaders were wary. Naval rivalries with Germany, tensions over colonies, and the rise of new powers forced Britain to carefully navigate a rapidly changing world. Austria-Hungary, one of Europe's oldest empires, faced the challenge of governing a diverse population of Germans, Hungarians, Slavs, and many other ethnic groups. Nationalist movements, particularly in the Balkans, threatened the very integrity of the empire. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of Slavic peoples, increasingly challenged Austria-Hungary's authority in the region. Meanwhile, Italy, still a relatively young nation-state, sought prestige and colonies of its own. Nationalism ran deep across the continent. Citizens identified strongly with their nations, often at the expense of peace and diplomacy. Militarism glorified military strength, technology, and strategy. Armies were expanded, navies built, and conscription became common. The Industrial Revolution had created unprecedented efficiency in weapon production. Railways allowed rapid troop movements. Europe was ready for war, whether it realized it or not. Kaiser Wilhelm II, the German emperor, famously declared, "I and the army were born for one another," reflecting the militaristic mindset that pervaded the continent. In France, leaders spoke openly of revenge. In Russia, generals and politicians debated mobilization. In Britain, newspapers warned of growing danger. Europe's leaders were preparing for a war that, when it came, would exceed all previous conflicts in scale and devastation. Europe's system of alliances was intended to preserve peace by deterring aggression. Instead, it ensured that any local conflict could spiral into a continental war. The Triple Alliance, consisting of Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Italy, promised mutual support. The Triple Entente, formed by France, Russia, and Britain, did the same for its members. Both sides hoped that these agreements would prevent war, but history proved otherwise. By 1914, the alliances had become a tightly woven web. Any clash between Austria-Hungary and Serbia could quickly involve Russia, drawing in Germany and France. The intricate diplomatic arrangements, secret treaties, and mobilization plans meant that war, once begun, would be difficult to contain. European leaders may have believed in the deterrent power of alliances, but in reality, these agreements guaranteed escalation. Behind the scenes, generals and politicians prepared contingency plans. Railroads, telegraphs, and communication networks were organized for rapid mobilization. Europe was walking a tightrope, and even a small stumble could send the entire continent tumbling into war. While Western Europe experienced industrial growth and relative peace, the Balkans simmered with unrest. This region, often called the powder keg of Europe, was home to multiple ethnic groups, religions, and nationalist movements. Austria-Hungary controlled Bosnia-Herzegovina, but the Serbs considered it part of a Greater Serbia. Nationalist fervor ran high, and secret societies formed to challenge imperial authority. The Black Hand, a Serbian nationalist organization, trained assassins and planned acts of violence against Austro-Hungarian officials. The Balkan Wars of 1912 and 1913 had further destabilized the region, increasing tensions and leaving large populations displaced. The Balkans were rife with conspiracy, political intrigue, and a volatile mixture of ambition and resentment. The stage was set for a crisis. Any small incident could ignite the tinderbox. That incident would arrive in Sarajevo on June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, visited Sarajevo with his wife, Sophie. Their visit was intended to demonstrate imperial authority and pacify tensions, but fate intervened. Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old Bosnian Serb, had positioned himself along the motorcade route as part of a larger conspiracy orchestrated by the Black Hand. Earlier attempts to assassinate the Archduke had failed. Bombs were thrown and missed, conspirators hesitated. Then, by sheer chance, the Archduke's driver took a wrong turn. Princip stepped forward and fired twice. Both Franz Ferdinand and Sophie were killed almost instantly. The assassination sent shockwaves across Europe. Austria-Hungary was enraged. Serbia denied direct involvement, but suspicion alone fueled anger. Diplomatic channels scrambled to respond. Count von Oyos, an Austro-Hungarian official, wrote to Emperor Franz Joseph, "This act demands punishment, anything less will weaken our empire." The assassination was the spark, but the fuel for the fire had been accumulating for decades. The assassination triggered the July crisis, a tense month of diplomatic maneuvering. Austria-Hungary issued an ultimatum to Serbia with demands so severe that compliance would have meant giving up national sovereignty. Serbia accepted most demands but rejected a few, hoping to avoid war. Austria-Hungary, confident in Germany's unconditional support, prepared for military action. Russia mobilized partially to protect its Slavic ally. France and Britain debated their involvement, unsure how far to intervene. Every telegram and communication intensified the crisis. Europe was now a continent on the brink, and ordinary citizens remained oblivious to the war about to engulf them. The July crisis exemplified how miscalculation, miscommunication, and rigid alliances can transform a regional dispute into a continental catastrophe. Diplomats debated, generals prepared, and millions of soldiers stood ready along borders. The world teetered on the edge. By late July, the dominoes began to fall. Austria-Hungary declared war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. Russia began mobilizing to protect Serbia on July 30. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia on August 1 and on France on August 3. When German troops crossed into neutral Belgium, Britain declared war on Germany on August 4. In less than a week, a local Balkan conflict had escalated into a global war. Empires that had lasted centuries were now at war. Millions of lives would be changed forever, and the modern world would be altered in ways no one at the time could have predicted. World War I revealed the fragility of peace and the danger of nationalism, militarism, and entangled alliances. It showed how small actions, a single assassination, could cascade into unprecedented destruction. Millions of soldiers and civilians would die, empires would collapse, and new nations would rise from the ruins. History teaches that diplomacy is fragile, and peace is never guaranteed. The assassination in Sarajevo did not cause the war by itself, but it provided the spark for a continent already primed for conflict. Understanding the causes of World War I reminds us of the consequences of unchecked ambition, alliances, and political miscalculations. This is how the Great War began, a war that shaped the 20th century and continues to offer lessons for generations to come.